Bueno, pues buenos días. Seguimos nuestras sesiones y vamos a poner un broche de oro con la última ponencia. Gracias a la ponente que, bueno, al igual que Richard Kagan, viene desde muy lejos, ha viajado desde Nueva York para estar aquí y acompañarnos en este congreso para ofrecer esa perspectiva desde el mundo de los museos. A lo largo de estas sesiones habrán visto que una de las instituciones que más hemos escuchado es por una parte el Victorian Albert Museum y por otra parte el Metropolitan Museum of Art de Nueva York. En este caso no solo es porque es uno de los 5 grandes museos del mundo, sino porque también preserva probablemente uno de los mayores volúmenes de obras de arte salidas de España que actualmente se preservan allí. En este sentido, incluso el propio cartel de nuestro congreso tiene una imagen, y esa imagen es la del león, del conjunto mural del monasterio de San Pedro de Arlanza, de Burgos, que actualmente se preserva en The Cloisters. Y una de las personas que está al cuidado de estos tesoros es precisamente nuestra invitada, Brennan. Ella es Provenance Researcher and Collection Manager en The Cloisters, forma parte del staff de esa unidad de arte medieval del Metropolitan Museum of Art de Nueva York. Ella es especialista en provenance, es decir, esa tendencia a investigar sobre el origen, la procedencia de las obras, y de hecho se ha singularizado por conocer muy bien una de las grandes galerías de arte regentada por los hermanos Brummel, la Brummel Gallery, que tuvo su asiento primero en París, después a Nueva York, y que fue la responsable de un tráfico comercial muy intenso de tesoros artísticos desde Europa a Estados Unidos, razón por la cual buena parte de estas obras recalaron en el Met. El museo preserva la documentación de Brummel Gallery, que Christine es la mejor conocedora, ha estudiado muy bien. De hecho, ella fue quien dedicó su tesis doctoral a investigar todo ese trasiego, sobre todo relativo al arte medieval. Y bueno, gracias a ello tenemos numerosas publicaciones que nos han abierto camino y nos han abierto luz en ese sentido. Pero aparte de sus publicaciones en torno a Brummel Gallery y esa labor cotidiana de conservación de estos tesoros que se encuentran en The Cloisters, ha participado en exposiciones realmente interesantes, de las cuales obviamente han derivado también publicaciones que han quedado para todos nosotros. Una de ellas, por ejemplo, tuvo lugar en el 2020, cuando todos los museos cerraban sus puertas, el Met también, y se dedicaron a investigar y dar a conocer los orígenes, la historia de la propia colección. Así nació un evento, Making the Met, entre 1870 y 2020, en el cual se hicieron un homenaje a su propia historia, analizar el origen de las colecciones, y Christine fue una de las responsables de hacerlo posible, de llevarlo a cabo. Ella se doctoró en Nueva York, en el Barr Graduate Center, precisamente con esa tesis, The Brummel Gallery and the Market for Medieval Art in Paris and New York, en ese margen de años, 1906-1949, y hoy nos va a hablar acerca precisamente de estos temas. Provenance Research and Medieval Art at the Met, The Importance of a Collaborative Approach. Muchísimas gracias, Christine. Bienvenida.
I'm going to be presenting in English. I apologize. And I thank you in advance for your patience with my Spanish pronunciation. Thank you so much, Maria Jose Martinez Ruiz, for that very, very lovely introduction. I'd also like to thank Dr. Juan Zapatero Gomez Payete, Director of the Fundación de Castilla y León, and Cristina Berruguero Beltran for asking me to speak with you today about provenance research and the importance of a sustained dialogue between source site locations and the institutions that house medieval works of art from known points of origin. Lastly, also want to thank Jorge Araco Sanchez for his kind assistance in helping me with logistics of my trip to Burgos. The Met's medieval collections are the most comprehensive gathering of medieval art in North America, comprising works from the Mediterranean and Europe dated from the 4th century to the early 16th century, as well as pre-medieval European works of art creating during the Bronze and early Iron Ages. It contains approximately 10,000 works of art, including textiles, stained glass, ceramics, goldsmith's work, wood and stone sculpture, and architectural sculpture. The collection is notable for containing significant works of art from known sites of origin and with documented ownership histories. Today, I will highlight a few case studies that demonstrate the Department of Medieval Art and the Cloisters' long history of researching the provenance of works in the collection and collaborating with medieval source sites. These examples illustrate the variety of past and potential future collaborations. Before I delve into this focused topic, however, let me address the Met's policies and practices concerning provenance research more broadly. Continuous research of the collection in some form has been an integral feature of curatorial work at the Met from early in the museum's history. Provenance research, the study of a work of art's site of origin and/or its history, is also a fundamental component of curatorial work at the museum, even though the discipline of provenance research and museum positions devoted to such research is a phenomenon that is, for the most part, datable to the late 1990s. Thus, despite the considerable criticism the Met has faced in recent years, provenance research was and continues to be a priority for museum staff. Focus on the provenance of works in art museum collections has gained attention in the past 30 years as survivors and heirs of those dispossessed of art collections due to Nazi art looting activities during World War II have sought and obtained restitution. Institutions such as the Met have invested substantial time and expertise researching works that might relate to art confiscations during the Nazi regime. A thorough review of the history of antiquities in the collection has also been a priority for the museum. The attention these more recent concerns has received belie the fact that provenance research has been important to the Met since its earliest decades. Indeed, a museum guide from around 1888 includes provenance information for an exhibition of old master paintings. Within months of his arrival as director of the Met in 2018, Max Hollein emphasized that responsible stewardship of the collections includes the principles of transparency, research, ethical acquisition, and restitution. More recently, in March 2023, Hollein announced the creation of new leadership positions for provenance research and an ongoing public initiative, Cultural Heritage Now, aimed at providing formal occasions to highlight the museum's ongoing dialogue with museum and government officials around the world. He also underscored the importance of presenting the results of such research publicly. In addition to these new hirings, programs, and formal statements, however, the museum continues its long-standing practice to update provenance for the permanent collection online as more information becomes available, both through internal research and from external sources. Further, all Met publications, many of which include provenance information on works in the collection, are available to visitors to our website. The museum has also acknowledged that its acquisition policies have evolved greatly over time so that they are now in line with today's standards and in some cases exceed current practices. In November 2022, the Met announced a Memorandum of Understanding with the Ministry of Culture and Sport of the Hellenic Republic and the Museum of Cycladic Art in Athens. This agreement outlines the exchange of expertise in the study and conservation of Cycladic works of art with a goal of sharing findings, organizing symposia, and creating an online database. This collaborative project coincided with the opening at the Met of an exhibition and long-term loan of Cycladic art from the Leonard and Stern collection. A similar collaboration between the Met and the Republic of Iraq, announced in September 2025, included a joint research project to study a copper alloy sculpture from circa 1500 BCE, which you see on the right, a vessel stand with ibex. The Met and Iraq pursued joint research on this work following a determination by museum curators and researchers that the sculpture should be returned to the Republic of Iraq. 3D scanning of the work by Met staff led to a clear understanding of how such bronze works were produced through casting techniques in antiquity. Medieval works of art from abbeys, churches, and castles throughout Europe arrived in the United States in large numbers in the late 19th and early 20th centuries, during a period of significant collection building by private collectors and art museums, and we heard about some of this early in the conference. Artworks were acquired by museums for several reasons: to educate the public, advance American industry by providing historical models, instill taste in a public without the means to travel to Europe, and to demonstrate America's emergence on the world stage through the development of encyclopedic art collections. Medieval art and architectural elements had become available due to war, the dissolution of religious houses in Europe, poverty, political instability, and the need for European noble families to generate cash. Artworks flooded the market, and dealers and collector-dealers made the most of opportunities to profit from the movement of medieval art from Europe to the United States. Unlike many European museums whose core collections emerged from princely and noble collections, the Met was formed in 1870 by a group of affluent citizens whose goal was to assemble an art collection to encourage study, advance manufacturing, and provide instruction with the aim of creating a, quote, national institution and gallery of art. Far from the encyclopedic collection it became, the Met started with no collection or building or systematic policy for acquisitions, relying upon gifts of art. By the late 19th century, the museum focused on classical antiquities, contemporary painting, and plaster casts, including casts of European medieval sculpture, which were assembled largely for the purposes of instruction. Like the Victorian Albert Museum, the Met actively worked with countries and sites from where casts were taken to bring knowledge of broad and distant cultures to New York. Some of these included large models of famous monuments, such as the Parthenon and the Cathedral of Notre Dame. Two people, J. Pierpont Morgan and Edward Robinson, played crucial roles in the transformation of the Metropolitan and its collections during the early 20th century. J. Pierpont Morgan was a legendary financier and collector who became president of the museum in 1904. Edward Robinson was a Met curator and classical archaeologist who became director of the museum in 1910. In 1905, a year after Morgan's appointment, the museum's annual report stated that it would not refuse to acquire reproductions, especially if originals were unattainable. However, under Morgan's and Robinson's tenures, the museum increasingly focused on acquiring original works of art rather than copies, and on the professionalization of its staff, fundamentally transforming its future direction. From this time onwards, the Met would no longer defer to European museums or limit itself to copies for educational purposes. Instead, the emphasis shifted to focus on original works and, if possible, masterpieces. At the same time, the museum underwent these monumental changes. Morgan himself was acquiring at a rapid pace works for his personal collection. And particularly, he acquired medieval pieces, many of which he immediately lent to the Met. An editorial cartoon in Punch magazine from June 21, 1911, depicts the financier collector pulling Europe's artistic treasures to America with a giant magnet in the shape of the UN's currency symbol, an obvious critique of his voracious collecting appetite. The image may still resonate for those who feel American museum collections had benefited from similarly aggressive acquisition policies. The Met, like other museums, was like other context of an imperative that fit into an American narrative of progress and from which international collectors, dealers, and governments were only too eager to profit. The Met's acquisition policy has been dramatically transformed in the ensuing decades, and while the revised mission statement from 2015 reinforces the museum's goal to present an encyclopedic array of art across time and cultures, its focus on connecting people to creativity, knowledge, and ideas also acknowledges the necessity of ongoing research and collaboration. Works of art with illustrious provenances have been coveted by eager collectors since the earliest collections were formed. Morgan was no different. He sought objects of importance, including works with known provenances, and his acquisitions of medieval art followed this pattern. On this subject, one dealer remarked, quote, "To him, pedigree is also of importance, if for no other reason than the historical continuity which is so much a part of the aura surrounding works of art." End quote. Indeed, a penchant for works with significant histories suggests a desire to connect oneself with royal and noble European collections and with the wealthy or most renowned collectors. The gift of more than 2,000 medieval works to the Met in 1916 and 1917 from Morgan's son, Jack Morgan, in memory of his father, catapulted the medieval collection into the most important of its kind in North America. Many of these sculptures, enamels, and ivory carvings have provenances linking them to known sites or famous collectors. An important figure in the history of the Department of Medieval Art and the Cloisters was curator James J. Rorimer, who we've heard a little bit about earlier in the week. And although Rorimer examined Morgan's bills of sale in the 1940s to learn more about the history of Morgan works gifted to the museum, recent discoveries show that there is additional information to be found. For example, Morgan was aware that a processional cross he acquired was from the Church of San Salvador de Fuentes in Asturias, but it was only following Rorimer's review of Morgan's bills that museum staff learned the Parisian art dealer Arthur Sambon had sold it to Morgan in either 1911 or 1912. Finally, last January, we were able to confirm the date of sale as June 28, 1911, from the Sambon Gallery's records now available at the French National Archives in Paris. We still do not know precisely when and from whom Arthur Sambon acquired the cross. It is believed to have also been in the Parisian collection of Ernest Guillou, although it does not appear in catalogs of the 1905 and 1906 Guillou sales at the Hôtel Drouot. The March 1905 Guillou sale catalog, however, was written by Arthur Sambon, which suggests the latter may have acquired the cross privately from Guillou. Further research of the Arthur Sambon records may provide us with more information about the early history of this work. Another example from Morgan's collection illustrates that there is still important research to be done, even on works of art with widely known provenances and histories. A 15th century silver censer comes from the cathedral treasury at Basel, Switzerland, and was sold by the local community in 1836. Following that, the censer passed through numerous private collections, including those of Prince Soltikoff and Baron Achille Cellier, two celebrated Parisian collectors of the mid to late 19th century. But we still do not know, however, when and from whom Morgan acquired the work, as the bill of sale has not yet been located among the numerous papers located at the Morgan Library and Museum. In addition to researching the provenance of works of art connected with sites in Europe, the Department of Medieval Art and the Cloisters has also prioritized collaborations that connect source sites and works in the collection more directly by supporting the creation of facsimile reproductions of works of art. The department has in fact undertaken the largest number of collaborative facsimile projects connected with source site locations of any department at the Met. And I want to emphasize that we have 17 curatorial departments, and the Department of Medieval Art and the Cloisters has worked with colleagues on the largest number of these projects. Our most recent collaboration was completed in September 2024. Facsimiles of two large sculptures given to the Met by J. Pierpont Morgan in 1916 were installed in the funerary chapel for which they were created at the Chateau de Biron. And right now you're looking at the original sculptures on view at the Met. One sculpture is a Pietà flanked by two donors, the men who commissioned the sculpture for the Biron family chapel, Paul Gonteau on the right and his brother Armand, Bishop of Sarlat, reaching out to support Christ's head on the left. The other sculpture depicts the entombment of Christ. The donor's descendant, Guillaume de Gonteau Biron, Marquis de Biron, sold the sculptures to J. Pierpont Morgan in 1907 with the assistance of Morgan's primary dealer, Jacques Seligman. Morgan immediately lent them to the Met, where they were first exhibited in 1908 in the museum's main hall. Like the works discussed previously, these sculptures formally entered the collection as gifts of Morgan's son. Although museum officials knew the provenance of these works from the moment they arrived, the exact date of sale on May 16, 1907, and the price, £22,000 sterling, a tremendous sum for the time, was only discovered in 2016 during research for an exhibition on Morgan's collecting activities held at the Wadsworth Atheneum in Hartford, Connecticut. Through the years, the sculptural ensemble has continued to play an important role in the museum's display of late medieval art. From the 1950s onwards, the Met fielded numerous requests for copies of the sculpture to be made. Because at the time the only method of creating a copy was to make plaster casts of the sculptures, a process that could damage the fragile carvings, these initial requests were denied. By 2021, with new technologies of photogrammetry available, we were delighted to partner with a French company called Semitour, known for its reproductions and facsimiles, most notably of the caves of Lascaux IV. Representatives from Semitour contacted the Met to explore the feasibility of creating full-size facsimiles of these sculptures for the Chateau Biron, which had recently become a historic site and museum in the Dordogne region. Large files and data sets provided by the Met's photography staff were used by Semitour's subsidiary, L'Atelier de Facsimile Périgord, to create the copies, which were covered with a mineral veil of crushed limestone to enhance the impression that the sculptures were carved from local stone. And on the left, you see an unfinished facsimile of the Pietà, and on the right, you see the finished facsimile of the entombment back in situ at the chateau. And here you see the Pietà back in situ. In 2024, museum staff traveled to Biron to attend the inauguration ceremony organized to mark the installation of both facsimiles. Held on September 20th, 2024, the event drew considerable press attention. Remarks by local elected officials and representatives of Semitour and the Atelier de Facsimile Périgord celebrated the Met's partnership as an important model for collaboration around cultural patrimony initiatives. It was an incredible experience for us, Met staff, to visit a source site connected to our collection and see the accurate life-size copies of the sculptures installed in the precise locations designed for the originals. Members of the curatorial staff found it extremely moving to participate in the ceremony celebrating the installation of these facsimiles and to witness the effect of this reunification on the staff at the chateau, the local population, and the artists who worked on this project. Some remarked that the chapel felt whole again after more than a century. It is one of several initiatives the Department of Medieval Art and the Cloisters has undertaken in recent years that can serve as models for future facsimile projects. Indeed, this collaboration was a significant step in consolidating our own commitment to researching and conserving these important sculptures and to strengthening the connection between the works on view in the galleries and the site for which they were commissioned. The sculptures will soon undergo a multi-year conservation project that we hope will allow us to learn more about their creation and original installation. Met conservators have already visited the chapel at Biron, meeting with staff there to learn more about their original context. The first collaborative facsimile project the department was involved in dates to 2006, when the World Monument Fund reached out about a conservation project at La Cartuja de Miraflores here in Burgos. The project, which was a partnership between the World Monuments Fund, the regional government of Castile and Leon, and a local foundation, included conservation of the main altar, the tomb of the Infante Alfonso, and the alabaster mausoleum of King Juan II and Isabel of Portugal by renowned late medieval sculptor Gil de Silouet. The Carthusian fathers were interested in having a reproduction of a sculpture of Santiago in the Met's collection since 1969, originally from the tomb. Commissioned by Isabel for her parents and completed between 1489 and 1493, this magnificent star-shaped tomb, including this figure, became a national monument in 1923, but it suffered extensive damage and loss. Over time, the sculpture of Santiago appears to have been moved from its original location, and it may have even been placed in a different location for private devotion. While it is not known exactly when the Santiago sculpture left the tomb permanently, it is believed to have been in the possession of José María de Palacio y Abarzuza, Conde de las Almenas, before 1923, possibly accorded to him in partial payment for work he sponsored at the site. The carving was in an auction of his collection in New York in January 1927. Between 1934 and its sale to the museum, it appeared in approximately three American private collections, the last of which was Andre Tresley of New York, who lent the sculpture to the Metropolitan's 1968 exhibition of medieval art and private collections. Documentation in our files suggests that it was shortly before that exhibition that Met curators were made aware of its existence and potential for acquisition. At the time of the Met's purchase of the work, members of the curatorial staff discussed the feasibility of creating a copy for the original site as a gesture of acknowledgement and goodwill. But it was not until 2007, however, that the museum made a copy as close to the original as was reasonably possible. When the facsimile arrived at Miraflores, Father Jose Maria, administrator at the monastery, described the moment. Quote, "As everyone present were such enthusiastic and experienced art specialists, we made shreds of the box as we opened it, and then I was the one that got to place Santiago in its former spot on the upper part of the royal tomb. I wish you could have been there to share such a special moment and to receive personally the congratulations of all of us there present." End quote. And here we see the facsimile in situ in 2010. Like the Biron sculptures previously discussed, this example demonstrates the role that reproductions can play in returning works to their original sites in a meaningful way while the original carvings remain on display at the Met, presenting the magnificence of late medieval funerary sculpture to an audience of more than 5 million visitors per year. Projects like these create bridges between medieval monuments in Europe and American museums. They also provide important opportunities for scholarly discussion concerning artistic attribution, provenance, and the history of the art market. Supporting facsimile initiatives associated with the Met's medieval collection is not the only method to encourage scholarly exchange and collaboration. Another way the museum has engaged with medieval sites across Europe is through loans. Loans make it possible for objects in the Met's collection to be reunited with their original location and/or with other works from the same site. In 1992, the Met lent a painted and gilded limestone sculpture of Saint Catherine from the chapel of the Hôtel Dieu at Issoudun, France, to the Musée de la Hospice Saint-Roch, where it remains today. Classified as a historical monument in 1965, the Hôtel Dieu has been part of the Musée de la Hospice Saint-Roch since 1966. The medieval sculpture was considered a forgery for many decades until the early 1960s, when it was confirmed to have come from Issoudun. It was not a forgery, but had extensive restorations. The sculpture had once also belonged to J. Pierpont Morgan, and its association to Issoudun was already suggested when Morgan placed the works on loan to the Met in 1910. Initial information about the sculpture's history was incorrect, however, and we now know that Morgan acquired the work from the famous art-dealing family Duveen Brothers that same year. Significant loans to the Met highlight the artistic achievements of medieval art and culture for an American audience, and the loan of medieval works of art from specific sites to the Met also facilitates important long-term connections with source sites. The earliest and most significant example of a permanent loan occurred in 1958 and is well known to most of you here today. A Met press release from February 19, 1958 announced, quote, 12th century apse to be installed at the Cloisters in unique exchange loan with Spain. Metropolitan Museum lending 6 famous frescoes to the Prado, end quote. Acknowledging that this partnership garnered criticism at the time and also in recent decades, it can also be argued that it foreshadowed some of the later collaborations focused on positive shared stewardship of medieval art and culture. In 1935, the Metropolitan, and especially John D. Rockefeller Jr., financier and the primary patron for the creation of the Cloisters, became interested in acquiring the Romanesque apse of the Church of San Martin in Fuentidueña. As early as the 1880s, the church was in ruins. The bell tower and nave of the church were partially destroyed, with the nave serving as a graveyard, but the apse was relatively intact. Even though the church was identified as a national monument in 1931, negotiations for a possible sale to the Metropolitan Museum of Art resumed as late as 1952. A law of 1933 prevented the export of national monuments from Spain, and it soon became clear that purchasing the apse would not be possible, but that a long-term loan might be feasible. Before the apse could be moved, however, approval was required from a variety of Spanish governmental agencies, including the Foreign Office, the Ministry of Education and its Department of Fine Arts, the Academy of History, the Academy of San Fernando, the Bishop of Segovia, the Mayor of Fuentidueña, and the Holy See in Rome. Following additional protracted negotiation between American diplomats and their counterparts in Spain, a long-term loan rather than a sale to the museum was approved. The apse was disassembled beginning in 1958. Carmen Gomez Moreno, an art historian and subsequently curator at the Met, and daughter of the renowned professor of art history, Manuel Gomez Moreno, was responsible for overseeing this dismantling and removal of the apse and its installation at the Met. It was formally opened to the public at the Met Cloisters in 1961. Met officials offered several options for an exchange for the apse. Eventually, the museum purchased 6 well-known frescoes depicting hunting scenes from the 12th century Hermitage of San Basilio de Berlanga. Residents of Casillas de Berlanga sold the frescoes to the Italian dealer Leon Levi in 1922. The possible sale of the 6 frescoes faced significant criticism, however, but a 1925 court case affirmed the right of the residents of Casillas de Berlanga to sell them to Levi. The frescoes were sent to the United States and were sold in 1952 to two Indianapolis businessmen. With the assistance of James Rorimer, the frescoes were eventually acquired by the Met expressly for inclusion in the exchange for the Fuente Dueña apse and were sent to the Prado Museum in Madrid. When the apse was opened at the Cloisters in February 1961, curator James Rorimer underscored that it would be seen and admired by the nearly 1 million people who visit the Cloisters each year. That's, of course, perhaps an overstatement by Rorimer, who was known for such overstatements. The loan has been in place now for more than 60 years, and countless visitors to the Cloisters have had the opportunity to appreciate the experience in New York of walking into a Spanish 12th century apse. Still, this has not mitigated the opinion of some who believe the apse was improperly removed during Franco's regime. Perhaps a visit to the Met Cloisters might provide a silver lining. It is a place where visitors can learn about medieval Spanish art and culture. In addition, they can experience the distinctive features of the space through remarkable exhibitions, such as Spain 1000 to 1200, Art at the Frontiers of Faith, held in 2021, and our current exhibition, Spectrum of Desire, Love, Sex, and Gender in the Middle Ages, open through March 29th of 2026. Musical events often held in the space captivate audience because of the fantastic acoustics, and symposia that take place there provide innumerable opportunities for learning. Participation in international conferences focused on dispersed medieval architectural elements and other works of art from specific source sites, like this one, provides another valuable approach to scholarly cooperation. In 2018, the Met participated in a scholarly symposium in San Gemini, Italy, focused on the fate of Italian monumental works from known locations which had been dispersed during the first half of the 20th century. Griffith Mann, curator in charge of the medieval collection, presented a paper discussing the complex history of a 12th century doorway from the Abbey Church of San Nicolo, located on the edge of the town of San Gemini. Acquired in 1947, the museum installed the doorway permanently in 1965 at the end of one of the galleries devoted to Byzantine art in the museum's main building at Fifth Avenue. The distinct nature of the carving on each side of the doorway and the bases suggest that they may have originally come from different buildings and were combined to form the portal in the Middle Ages. By the mid-16th century, the monastery was suppressed and it was abandoned in the 17th century. By 1800, the Abbey Church was in a ruinous state, and by the beginning of the 20th, the roof had completely collapsed and the entrance to the main portal had been walled up. In 1936, an art dealer renowned for trading in medieval sculpture and architectural sculpture, Joseph Brummer, became interested in acquiring the portal and bringing it to New York for sale. A sculptor turned art dealer, Brummer had an affinity for sculptural works and fragments. Working in Paris and later New York at a significant moment of collecting and museum building in the United States, Brummer's keen eye and his numerous international contacts made it possible for him to locate works throughout Europe. Several months out of each year, Brummer traveled abroad, visiting clients, dealers, and sites of interest to him. And he even appears to have visited the dilapidated church of San Nicolo. And he's actually, it's very hard to see, but he's in the slide on the left. He offered $25,000 for the portal while it was still in situ. Thus, in 1936, working with the Italian government through the dealer Ugo Giandolo, permission from the Italian government was granted and Brummer acquired the piece. Once the export paperwork was in place, workers began to disassemble the doorway for shipment to New York. During that process, they found 1st and 2nd century Latin inscriptions on several elements of the back of the door, indicating that the blocks of stone came from classical buildings that were reused in the medieval period. The discovery of this spolia temporarily caused concern because earlier Roman remains were considered more important than medieval carvings. Following a brief pause, the Italian government eventually agreed to the removal and shipment of the portal elements to New York, where they remained with Joseph Brummer at his gallery for 11 years. Later, it came to light that Jean Delot may have promised the Italian government to provide a plaster cast of the doorway for the National Gallery at Perugia or for San Gemini itself, but that information appears not to have been conveyed to Joseph Brummer, and no cast was produced. Meanwhile, the site was acquired privately, and that owner committed to restore the site. The owner contacted the Met about obtaining a cast of the doorway in 1960. Estimates were compiled, but by then, the original doorway was already permanently installed and the costs were prohibited. Instead, museum curators provided photography, plans, and measurements of the doorway, and a copy created by an Italian artist was completed in 1967, which you see on the right. Carefully and thoughtfully restored, the owner of the property made it available to members of the local community. The department was delighted to participate in this scholarly symposium at San Gemini, focused on works of Italian art in American museums. It provided us with the opportunity to reflect on the collecting practices of the first half of the 20th century, acknowledging that standards have dramatically changed since then. It also allowed the Met to consider its ongoing responsibility to engage and collaborate with external colleagues working on topics connected with works in our collections and their source sites. The publication of the papers delivered at the conference includes an essay by Dr. Mann, which includes its movement to New York and installation at the Met. Over time, collecting practices change, and the Met have evolved significantly over its more than 150-year history. The museum has acknowledged that some past collecting practices would be handled differently today. The Met's commitment to the principles of transparency, continuing research of the collection, ethical acquisition, and restitution under appropriate circumstances, firmly articulated at the beginning of Max Hollein's directorship, drives current curatorial practices. Today's lecture, I hope, has demonstrated that information sharing, collaboration, and partnerships have been and continue to play a vital role in our work in the Department of Medieval Art and the Cloisters at the Met. Just like initiatives such as Nostra e Mundi showcase the cultural heritage of Castile and Leon outside of Spain, curatorial staff at the Met strive to highlight the connection of medieval works in our collection to their original sites. Perhaps the examples outlined can provide inspiration for further dialogue and collaboration. Thank you very much.